and you were not considered a volunteer. However, if you felt you were going to be drafted, it was an opportunity to take advantage of that and just
how did that work?
get it done.
So did you sign up for that?
Yes, actually, I went with two of my very close friends. We drove down to the Torrington office and told the recruiter, or not the recruiter, but the draft agent person that we wanted to volunteer for the draft. So that was what we did.
And what were your two friends' names?
Joseph Gadenzi, who went to high school with me, and David Tizera, who was also in high school with me.
So the three of you went to Torrington. Where were you living at the time?
Well, all of us were living in Winsted. I was on Marshall Street. Joe was on Center Street. Dave was on Oakdale Avenue.
Paul, why did you decide to enlist for the draft? Because you knew you were going to be drafted, or did it give you more options?
It probably gave us the option of going together, which was important. Basically, the Vietnam War was really heating up. Joe and I had both recently dropped out of college. Dave was working in a factory, and quite honestly, there wasn't a whole lot of future for us in Winsted at that time, and we felt like it was probably a good thing for us to join the Army and do something for the country.
After you went to Torrington and signed up, what happened after that?
Well, we got our notice to report for our physicals. We were all, I should say, Joe and I were in good shape. Dave was overweight at the time. So actually the service, within a few short months, he was a lean, mean fighting machine. But we went and passed our physicals, obviously, and it was only a short time, we'll say maybe a couple months, from the time we volunteered for the draft before we actually reported to Fort Dix on February 20th, 1968.
And all three of you reported together?
Hand in hand, literally.
And how long were you at Fort Dix? Is that where you did your basic training?
Yes, it was. We did our basic there, and all three of us had volunteered for the infantry, which I don't know as there was going to be a lot of choice at that point anyway. Most of the draftees were going in, and if you were physically able, they were going to send you to Vietnam. We spent 8 weeks at Fort Dix in what is referred to as basic training, which you went over all the basic marching, or taking orders, rifle drill, hand grenade stuff, physical conditioning, but you were not, it was generic. Everyone that went in received that training. Whether you were going to be a cook or a truck driver down the road, it didn't matter. That was the basic training, so that's where we got it.
And what was your impression of basic training? How was that for you?
For myself and also for Joe, like I said, we were in good shape when we went in. We were athletes in high school. I kind of enjoyed it because we were certainly in the top 10% of recruits as far as being in shape and getting through all the programs they had.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
I actually do. It was a Sergeant Suber. Suber, S-U-B-E-R. He was a black drill sergeant, very, unlike a lot of them, very mild-mannered, soft-spoken. There was a Sergeant Kanjemi, who was recently back from Vietnam. There was a Sergeant Ross, who had been in the service for quite some time, and I say quite some time, maybe 10 years, and he wanted to go to Vietnam, and from what I understand, after he finished boot camp with us, he got his wish, and I don't believe he made it home.
After after your 8 weeks of basic training, where did you go?
From there, our original company of about 200 guys from Fort Dix was split up, and I think about 60 of us were sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana for advanced infantry training. And when we arrived, as you drove into the gates of Fort Polk, the sign read, "Home of the Combat Infantry Soldier for Vietnam." Not that we all didn't think we were going there, but kind of cemented
So you
the
knew
idea.
going in you were going to
Pretty
be
much.
in Vietnam.
Right. And actually we not only volunteered for the infantry, but Joe, Dave, and I also volunteered for service in Vietnam.
So the three of you went together to Fort Polk too?
Right. Yes, we did.
How long did you stay at Fort Polk?
That was 9 weeks.
And what kinds of things did they teach you during that 9
Well,
weeks?
that was individualized for infantry, light weapons, or medium weapons. And actually, Joe and Dave went to one company, and I was separated from them at that time. I went to, more or less specialized in medium weapons, which were the 90 recoilless and the 106 recoilless rifles. Which they didn't get training on that. They did more.
Why were you trained in medium weapons? Did you choose that?
No,
or
I
did they
didn't.
tell you?
I didn't. It just happened, and I think it was all out of that group of 60 of us that left from Fort Dix. I think there was 4 or 5 of us that were taken out of that group.
What can you tell me about the 90 and the 106 recoilless rifles?
Well, the 90 more or less took the place of the bazooka from World War II. The 90 was a shoulder-fired weapon, weighed approximately, I don't know, 15 or 20 pounds, and it was 90 millimeter. That's what, consequently, the 90 recoilless, they called it. It had a, you could fire it from your shoulder, and the word recoilless meant there was no recoil, but you had an area in the back that you couldn't stand behind, because that's where the pressure was released from the rear. And the 106 was just a bigger version of the 90, and that was usually mounted on a vehicle or a large tripod.
So was your entire 9 weeks at Fort Polk in training on these recoilless rifles?
No, but like I said, I received the same training that Joe and Dave did, only they may have done some more training with the M16, where I did the 90 and the 106. But that probably was about a 2 week out of the 9.
What was the training in Fort Polk like compared to Fort Dix?
Well, it was more physical fitness, run every morning, calisthenics. But the biggest thing about Fort Polk was the weather conditions, which were meant to be similar to those in Vietnam. It was very, very humid there, very hot, and you know, it got you accustomed certainly to what we were headed for.
How did you handle the weather change? You're a New England boy.
Yes, and when we first got there, it was drenching. You know, in the morning you'd get up and have to make your bunk and then go do, run for several miles and do calisthenics. It was, we'll say, tough maybe for a couple weeks, but you know, at 19 years old, we quickly adjusted, and it was just hot, but kind of a good hot after we got going.
Now, after your training at Fort Polk, where did you go?
Well, Joe, Dave, and I, again, and several other guys from Connecticut, New York. There was a big graduating class from Fort Polk, and a lot of us got together, and guys organized a charter flight from Fort Polk up to, I believe we landed right in Hartford. I'm not 100% sure. It might have been New York, but nonetheless, all the guys from Connecticut took that flight, and we came home in early July of '68 for about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks maybe, and that was before our deployment. We had gotten orders for Vietnam.
Oh, so when you came home on leave, you knew?
We
you
knew.
were gonna
We
go
had
to
orders for Vietnam, yes.
So then you were home for 3 weeks. How did you, and then did you go together with your unit to Vietnam, or did you fly individually?
Actually, we were very fortunate again. Joe, Dave, and I all had orders for the same time frame. We all had to report to Fort Lewis, Washington on a certain date. I want to say it might have been around July 20th or somewhere in that area of '68. We spent maybe a day there, and from there we flew commercial airline to Alaska, and from Alaska to Japan, and Japan into Vietnam, landing in the, I don't remember if it was the afternoon or not, but it was, might have been mid to late afternoon.
Where did you arrive?
We landed in Cam Bay.
What was your first impression of Vietnam when you landed?
Well, as we were coming into land, we were all wondering if we were going to be shot at, I guess. But Cam Bay was a huge facility. More or less where we landed was a very, very secure area. Of course, we didn't realize that, but again, it was hot when we got off the plane, but of course we had just left Connecticut, which was July, so we were in pretty good shape as far as the heat. And almost immediately I was separated from Joe and Dave. That evening they had a formation and they called my name, and I was told I was leaving, and I left on a helicopter for my next unit, which was the 196th Light Infantry Brigade out of Chu Lai.
After you'd been together, the three of you, that long, it must have been kind of tough leaving those guys.
Believe me, I was dumbfounded. And the next morning, to add insult to injury, when I got to my unit up there in Chu Lai, they assigned me to KP for the following morning. But while I was outside doing some pots and pans, another a deuce and a half rolled in with more replacements, and my old pal Dave Tazera was in the one of the trucks. So Dave and I were reunited again for another about 4 or 5 days, which was great.
Wow. So tell me what happened then. How long were you at Chu Lai?
Chu Lai was an indoctrination period once you arrived at your unit in Vietnam, where they explained what you'd be doing, and you kind of had a little, a very brief refresher course of, booby traps, your M16, different various things you might encounter in the jungle itself, once you left Chu Lai. Again, that was about a 4 or 5 day, I think it was 5 actually, 5 day stint.
Now you went in as a replacement?
When I say replacement, obviously we were replacing the troops. It was a revolving door over there. Unlike today, the soldiers, most of the soldiers that went to Vietnam went like we did, by plane. And you went individually, and you were assigned to a unit when you arrived in Vietnam. So out of the 200 or so guys that I flew to Vietnam with, actually only one wound up where I could see him on a routine basis.
Now, when you were training at Chu Lai, did you know what your specific job was going to be?
Well, I was then assigned, like I said, I had been trained in medium weapons along with light weapons infantry. But when I arrived in Chu Lai, they told me I would be assigned to a recon recon company. Actually, Echo Company was recon and mortars, and I was in the recon section of that, which more or less was just I was just an infantry soldier in the jungle.
So after your orientation in July, where did you go?
Well, from there, and as luck would have it, the one soldier that actually went with me from basic training in Fort Polk and then to Vietnam, there was just the two of us, and they put him on the first helicopter out to the field, and I went on the second. So he wound up with one squad, and I was with another. Actually, we were working in squad sizes, which were basically about 10 guys, 10 GIs per squad. And Phil Davis was this, the other replacement besides me, going out to the field that day. And like I say, as luck would have it, Phil was sent to an area a few miles from me, and about 3 weeks later he was overrun by Viet Cong, and he lost his life.
Phil was another guy from Winston?
Actually, he was from Cincinnati, Ohio, and we met in the service, when we were in training.
Now, when they flew you out to the field, where did you go? Where was the field?
Well, the field was, I was south of Da Nang and west of Chulai, I guess. There was a large mountain in front of us, Hill 932, which was an NVA stronghold area. And actually we operated within sight of that most of the time I was out in the jungle.
When they flew you out, so when you went out into the field, you went as a squad?
No, I went by
company?
myself. I went by myself and landed out and met up with the squad in the actually in the field. They were already out there, right?
So how big of a presence did the Americans have there?
When I landed out there, like I said, there was only 9 other guys, and we basically were, like I say, a reconnaissance team, and we just observed enemy activity and monitored the situation around us. We tried to stay on hilltops and stay out of harm's way, because again, we were a really small
How
unit.
long would you stay in the field?
We stayed out there for a couple months at a time.
Just you 10 guys?
Right, just us 10 guys. We had, water and sea rations would be flown out by helicopter. Every 3rd day we would get a hot meal, but we had no hot water, we had no ice, we had no communication with the rest of the world other than a radio set. That was, the standard issue for all the units in Vietnam.
How would you get that hot meal every 3rd day?
That came out by helicopter. It would come in those, they're actually primitive thermal containers, but food was, was at least warm when we get it. And they would consist maybe of fried chicken, or that's really the only meal I can remember getting as a hot meal. I'm sure we got some other stuff, but that was once every 3 days.
So, after you'd be in the field, were you typically in the same spot, or would you move around every day to a different location?
We would stay basically in the same spot in the night, but during the day we would do patrols from where we were set up at night. Like I say, again, reconnaissance patrols to see what had happened in our area of view, or whatever, if you want. see if anything was going on. And so there were some days where we didn't leave our position.
So were you always like very close to the enemy then, if you were out in the field and you were in
Right.
reconnaissance, you were watching their movements?
Right, we actually didn't know how close we were at times, I suppose, because I'm sure they knew about where we were, more so than we knew where they were, because they didn't have helicopters flying in and out of their position. And we would get resupply at least every other day, you know, water and or ammunition, things like that.
So wouldn't the North Vietnamese see those helicopters dropping off supplies?
Certainly, right.
Now, how long were you on reconnaissance patrols, where you would go out for a few months and then go back to July?
Actually, we'd go back to whatever was the rear area, and
And that changed?
and I actually know the Chulai was the rear area for the 196 while I was there, and we would go in what they call for stand down. The line companies, which were the infantry guys that were in a company size unit that engaged the enemy, you know, more so than we would, because they had the manpower and the firepower. Those were the units that actually engaged the enemy on a day-to-day basis. We tried not to engage the enemy, but obviously being a small unit, we were easy to be picked on, and that's what happened to us. We would get sniper fire, and we would get engaged by smaller groups of Viet Cong quite often, but it wouldn't have taken much, you know, to overrun our position at any time.
Because there were only 10 of you.
There was only 10 of us, and I remember asking one of the sergeants when I first arrived there, you know, why are we out here, and what's to keep the enemy from just wiping us out? And he said, well, basically, because they won't. I didn't think that was a really good answer. And to this day, you know, yeah, it was just about, well, they could, but we would be replaced or whatever. And they did do it. Like I said, my friend Phil Davis was killed 3 weeks after our arrival because
And he was in a reconnaissance?
He was, just like I was, and that's just what happened. They just overran his position and killed 4 guys out of the 10 and wounded just about everybody else there. So it was a precarious situation.
Now, was your reconnaissance squad ever overrun or attacked?
It was attacked numerous times, and actually we probably, there was a good 2-week period where we received small arms fire daily, and it was just a stressful period of time, but by and large we managed to stay out of harm's way, and we were never overrun, fortunately.
Could you call in any kind of air support or backup?
We did that on a routine basis. We had mortar support, we had artillery support, and several occasions we had fighter jets, not fighter jets, but bombers drop high explosive and napalm around our position, and we had helicopter gunship support, all of which we used on a routine basis to keep ourselves safe.
So you'd be in the field for a few months and then you'd go back to your base for stand down. How long would you stand down before you would go back out into the field?
3 days.
3 days?
Yeah, 3 days of hot showers and some entertainment, Vietnamese style, where these groups would come in and sing American songs. They couldn't sing or speak English, but they could sing the American songs. And we drank beer, maybe ate some steak, and it was relaxing, but it was short-lived, and you'd be back out to where you knew best.
Now, when you would go back out, would you go out to pretty much the same location you had been in previously? Was it always a different spot?
Sometimes they, you know, I'd say they took that opportunity. I went on stand down maybe, I don't know, at least 3 times while I was in Vietnam. And I know on a couple of the occasions we did go to a different location, but we were going back out to the field. And when we came on stand down, our whole, you know, obviously our squad of 10 would be taken out of the field. And we went with other members of our Echo company. So it was a good opportunity to reposition teams.
Were you always located for your entire time in Vietnam up near Hill 932?
I was in that basic area, yes. Yeah.
Were there any casualties in your unit, Paul?
I would say I have a picture of the guys in my squad, actually, and a couple of members of my squad were killed, and I believe, you know, most of them were wounded. One of them got malaria. I think I might have been. I was one of the few that was not wounded or, you know, hurt in some way. I was injured slightly during a firefight. On a particular day, I had a Laws, M72 Laws rocket, which they show on TV now. All the terrorists have them blowing up stuff, and it's a shoulder-fired weapon. And the seal had let go on mine. I didn't, unbeknownst to me, and when I fired it, the heat seeped out and burned my neck. And I was medevaced out of the field, but while I was en route to the medevac, one of our own rounds dropped on our position, wounding several of my team members out of 10. So it was critical that I get back out to the field. I don't even think I was treated, and obviously I didn't have a very serious injury.
So
and
you went back out?
They just sent me back out. So much for my...
Did you receive any medals or awards or citations?
Yeah, I have, you know, all the medals that the infantry troops that served in Vietnam have. I was awarded the Bronze Star in a ceremony at a fire support base, along with several other members of my company, and I wound up with the Good Conduct Medal, but you know, the Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Gallantry Cross. I did receive the Combat Infantry Badge, which is significant from the standpoint of it does denote you were in combat, and you had to have come under fire. Of course, I wound up being eligible for that within a few days of being out in the jungle. I mean, it didn't take long to earn that badge. But I don't know if our unit, I'm sure that my unit received some meritorious awards, although I'm really not aware.
Paul, can you recall a couple of your memorable experiences in the field?
Well, I think right off the bat, the very first night that I was in the jungle, and this was just prior, like I say, to my friend Phil Davis being overrun. This little small group of 10 guys, they took 5 of us, and we went out on a night ambush. And if anyone had seen that movie Platoon, Charlie Sheen goes out on a night ambush, and you know, it was rainy, it's the bugs, the sounds, and of course there's the very real danger that you're going to wind up ambushing the enemy, or vice versa. And my first night out in the field, I actually was on a night ambush, and it was drizzly. The bugs were killing us, and we wound up setting up our ambush across the trail instead of alongside the trail. And we didn't realize that till morning when we woke up. Thank God that we didn't run into the enemy, because they would have walked right through us instead of alongside of us. Anyway, that was, you know, it just was a lucky experience that nothing happened. And then after Phil Davis and his squad were overrun, they stopped doing night ambushes, at least from a standpoint of from the recon units. We were just too small to be carrying out those things. You know, the night Phil Davis got overrun, that was.
Now, Paul, explain to me what the difference in the ambush. You said you set up an ambush across the trail instead of alongside.
Well,
how was that supposed to work?
Well, the ambush, theoretically, right, you wanted to be set up alongside of a trail. If the enemy came down the trail, you would, obviously, the ambush was surprise. You'd open fire. It was dark, night. They didn't know you were there, and you would ambush them. And
so what's the problem with you being
well, across the trail, it was like so. They were going to walk right. Theoretically, they would have walked right over the guy that was laying in the middle of the trail, and we would have been firing at them and also at each other. We were on a, you know, on a instead of being parallel with the trail, we were across it. So which would have been horrible.
When did you realize?
Not till daylight, you know, and I mean, when I say when we woke up, I mean, obviously we were awake most of the night, but always, one of us was anyway, but we didn't realize it till daytime. Because by the time we got out there that night, it was more than dusk.
So your intention had been to set up alongside the trail,
right.
But because of the darkness, you didn't?
Right, right.
Do you have any other memorable experiences when you were in the field?
Well, a few weeks later, like I say, my good friend Phil Davis was overrun, and I remember.
When did you hear about it?
Well, we were awakened by the sounds of explosions.
Oh, so and you were that close?
We were that close. We could hear the explosions. We could see it, and we didn't know what was going on, but we were monitoring the radio, and we heard the chaos when they would key up their mic. It was not a pleasant night for sure.
So you could actually listen in on the radio to what was
right.
happening in their
right,
location?
What was happening, right. And it was, you know, I was brand new, 3 weeks in Vietnam. I knew Phil was over there, and, you know, in the morning I found out he had been killed. I was sent over there because they, like I say, they lost 4 guys, and they sent me and one other new guy who also had come over on the same plane with me, and we went over there and helped clean up everything, the bodies, and then I stayed with that squad for the remainder of my tour, actually.
What squad number was that?
Actually, I don't even remember what squad, if we were first, second, or third.
But you were still part of the 196?
But I was still part of the Echo Company, 196, second of the first.
So you stayed with this second squad for the rest of your time there. So, and did it build up to 10 men again?
Oh yeah, but what always happened, some of the guys on that squad had 8 months in country when I got there. Some had 4, some had 6. So when they reached their 12 months tour of duty, they left and somebody else took their place.
So it was never the same group of 10
it was,
men?
no. Probably I spent my 12 months with actually only one guy the whole 12 months. The rest of them anywhere between 2 and 10. So it was a constant changing of the.
Well, so then your perspective as first coming in and you were the new guy, and then as these other fellows rotated out and you became the more senior of the group, how did that change on how you looked at things and how you treated new people coming in? Because when you first went in, you were pretty green and you you got your education fairly quickly. How did that evolve as you were there longer?
Well, that's a good question, because I do remember the evolution of that day 1 to day 365. One thing about the service when I went in, you know, everything was a count. We got in basic training, it was 8 weeks. So we were week 1, you're the brand new team on the field. By week 7, you were walking around like you were been in the service 20 years, because you were the senior guys in basic training. When we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, same thing. A 9-week stint there, and you know, in your first and second, third week, you were the new guys. By your 7th, 8th, and 9th week, you were kingpins on Fort Polk. And Vietnam, same thing. It started all over. As you said, I got in the field, baptism under fire immediately. I do remember the guys treating me pretty well, you know, helping you out. Again, some of these movies they've had on Vietnam with, you know, the guys indoctrinating the new guys, screaming and hollering and being, you know, I don't know, less than friendly. I really didn't encounter that. But the older guys did kind of look down on you like, hey, you're just brand new here, don't get too cocky, don't get too obnoxious, because you don't know what's going on. And you know, they were right. And I tried to help the guys that came in after me with, you know, assimilation into the jungle. And I always felt like I was coming home in one piece. And I do remember running into a couple guys, one in particular who told me emphatically he was going home. He had no doubt about it. And I read his name in the Stars and Stripes, which was kind of like a newspaper, that he had been killed. And I remember thinking back to our conversation we had the first couple nights we actually arrived in Vietnam. So these things stay with you forever. But I can remember in my last couple months of service in Vietnam, in particularly the last month, you're on cloud 9, and the rest of the guys looked at you like you were some kind of god because you made it and you were going home. Not that guys didn't get killed in the last month, but obviously your chances of going home were much better at that point than they were in your first month.
Do you feel that you learned a lot and you were a much better soldier by the end of your tour?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you understand. I did interact with the Vietnamese soldier, the locals, which they called the PFs, Popular Forces, and we did work closely with them. So I did pick up some of the language, you know, small phrases, could count. You could at least not necessarily carry on a conversation, but get your point across with them, and vice versa. They spoke very little English, but enough so that we could communicate with each other in a satisfactory manner. And but just taking care of yourself out in the field, the hygiene, getting used to not wearing underwear, that was a new experience. But because of the humidity and everything in the jungle, obviously we didn't have any, we got clean clothes about every 2 weeks.
So you just stayed in those same
You
clothes
stayed in the
for 2
same
weeks
uniform.
straight?
Right, all right.
What was your highest rank, Paul?
When I got to Vietnam, I was actually an E2, which was a private E2, the lowest rank being E1. Shortly after I was in Vietnam, I was promoted to PFC, which is private first class. And then I believe it was about 4 months later I made Specialist 4, which is just the next rank up. It's like corporal in the Marines. And then I believe I was in Vietnam around 8 months, so a total of 13 months in the service, and I made sergeant, which when I left Vietnam I was still a sergeant.
So you were a sergeant while you were in country?
Yes.
Did you have men that you were responsible
Right.
for?
Then I became a squad leader, and
When did you become a squad leader?
that would have been around April, March or so, March, April.
What year?
Of 1969.
And how did your responsibilities change once you became a squad leader?
Well, you were just in charge of 4 or 5 guys. And again, we were still a recon unit, so there was 2 sergeants. And by that time, having been there that long, and I say that long, I mean, at 8 months you were very experienced. And if you were any kind of guy at all, and I got to say most of the guys that I served with were, by the time they had been there 8 months, they pretty much had everything under control. So you were respected by the other guys in your squad, in your unit, whatever, and there wasn't any problem with having people do what they were told.
All right, Paul, I'm going to ask you some questions about daily living now. When you were overseas, how did you stay in touch with your family?
Well, the Army would let you write all the letters you wanted if you had time, and if you were in a combat area, I don't know about other areas in the service, but in Vietnam I know we could send everything for free, and you just had to put that you were, your return address, which was APO San Francisco. That was the Vietnam code, and just put free up in the right hand corner of the envelope, and your letters got sent for free. That was my only source of communication. I think there was some maybe some long distance radios or some type of phone.
But you used mostly letters?
Did
you have much time for writing letters?
There was times, we'd have a lull where maybe it was 2, 3, 4 days where not much was happening. It might be a rainy period or whatever out in the field. And, and when I first got there, and there were some times I wrote more than others. There were some weeks, I suppose, I didn't write at all.
And you touched on this a little bit earlier. What was the food like?
Well, I think I told you every 3rd day or so we'd get a hot meal, and but for the first 3 or 4 months I was there, it was pretty much sea rations on a 24/7 basis, and I got pretty sick of those. We would heat them up with a little sterno tab. We had our little P38 can opener, which came with every meal, and the meals would get dropped off by helicopter. And there was only, I think there was 6 or 8 different meals: ham and lima beans, steak and potatoes, spaghetti, chicken noodle soup. So I can't even remember the rest of them.
So you'd have sea rations for 3 meals a day?
Yeah.
Breakfast, lunch, and supper?
Yeah, and it was, there was a little pound cake in one of the meals. It was...
How often did they drop the food? Every day?
No, well, whenever we needed it. And again, being that we were in a squad size unit, we didn't, because you had to carry whatever you had. Depending on if we were staying in the same location, we could keep some stuff there. So that was handy. You didn't have to carry it around. But yeah, we had 3 or 4, half a dozen or so meals at a time ahead.
Now, did you always have enough supplies, ammunition, other supplies that you needed?
I thought so. I thought the Army did a good job of keeping us with the water, which was horrible. It was all iodized water, treated water. It tasted terrible. It was always room temperature, which was 75 to 95. And ammunition was not a problem. I mean, if we were under fire and we needed resupply emergency, we got it. I mean, there was plenty of grenades, M16 ammunition, M60 machine gun ammunition to go around. Yeah, I never experienced a situation where we were out of ammunition and/or food.
Now, there was certainly plenty of stress on your job. How did you cope with the stress?
Well, I don't know if I actually thought about it. I was only 20 years old. I actually turned 21 right before I came home from Vietnam, but I just kind of took one day at a time and had a positive outlook. Tried to get along with the guys I was in the field with, and I was, for the sake of a better word, you know, a gung-ho soldier. I mean, I thought we were doing the right thing. I wanted to come home in one piece, and you know, so whatever it was going to take to make that happen, I was willing to do it.
Did you do anything special for good luck?
Actually, I was given a St. Christopher medal by my then girlfriend, which I promptly lost within a. I thought that was a bad omen, and I had my sister mail me another one. I did try to carry that with me while I was over there.
Do you still have it?
Actually, I don't know as I do. I did bring a flimsy little aluminum bracelet that I wore over there, which after wearing it for about 6 months, I developed a jungle rot on my wrist, which is kind of like a ringworm. And so I took the bracelet off, but I brought it home. And I might have been home a few months, and I decided I would put it back on, and I redeveloped jungle rot. So I don't know. The bracelet I still have, but I wouldn't try wearing it again.
Now, I know you told me earlier, while you were over there, you said that your girlfriend gave you the St. Christopher's medal. You experienced what many Vietnam soldiers experienced, was your girlfriend at home found someone different. Can you tell me what that was about?
Yeah, that was not one of the more pleasant experiences. And I mean, it was a girlfriend I had had for several months before I went to Vietnam. You know, it might have been even a year, I don't know, but I stopped getting letters from her, and as you pointed out, a lot of guys went through that. And when we were in basic training, actually, they sang a lot of songs about that guy. You know, and his name was Jody. That was the boyfriend back home, the guy who was stealing your girlfriend. Anyway, I might have been in Vietnam 2 or 3 months, and maybe 4, I don't know. And all of a sudden, there was no letters, and one of my best friends then finally, I asked him, you know, what's going on, and he said that, you know, she is kind of like going out with somebody else. So it did work out. When I came home from Vietnam, I saw her, and you know, she said if I wanted to go out, we could. But I guess after being in a war for a year, I wasn't up for another one.
You didn't even get a Dear John letter? You just...
I never got a Dear John letter. No, I just got no letter, which was probably worse.
And what was the effect of that on your morale?
Bad, yeah, bad. I can remember thinking, you know, like if whatever happens, happens now. I mean, there was a period where I probably lost a little care factor. And there were other guys I saw getting these letters, and it was hard, no doubt. I did actually have one of the guys I served with, I think his name was, I know his last name was Torres, but there was a program the Army had where if you were, when you were drafted, if your girlfriend became pregnant and you were in Vietnam, they would allow you to go home and get married, so that in case something happened to you over there, your unborn child would have benefits. And this Robert, I think it was Robert Torres, did go home. We were there about, or he was there about 6 months. And I remember he flew home, got married, and came back. I felt sorry for him having to come back, but he did make it. He survived and went home to his new wife and child. And I don't know whatever happened to him, but I hope he's living happily ever after.
What did you do for entertainment?
Entertainment was non-existent out in the jungle. You know, just kind of like camaraderie among the guys and having little sterno tab cookouts with our sea rations. Some guys would make up a little sauce or something from a package they got home, and we might put it on something. And scrambled eggs was another one of the meals, and that was pretty horrible. They were all horrible by the end of 3 months.
So you didn't have any entertainment in the field. When you would get back to the base for stand down, you said that there was some local entertainment?
Yes, they brought in these groups. They weren't local, but they brought in these various Vietnamese groups that would sing.
Did you ever have any USO shows come in?
Actually, the USO girls, which we called Donut Dollies, flew out to the, actually did fly out to the field, but they would come in and come out, you know, leave quickly too. They'd be in there maybe a half an hour, and just in case. They definitely didn't want them in harm's way. So if you had any kind of activity in your area, they didn't come, but they showed up, you know, a couple times.
What did they do?
Well, they just came out with like little, they were American girls who had, I believe they were all college graduates, working in some type of social service programs.
I think it was the Red Cross.
And they would bring short timer calendars and some other little knickknacks. I don't remember even what they were. And just kind of make some small talk with you and how you doing, take a picture with you. I mean, it was good to see American female, but that was all they were there for. And like I say, before you knew it, they were gone, and that was that.
Did you get any leave time while you were in country?
I did. I was fortunate enough to get 2 R&Rs, which stood for the rest and recuperation. I believe it did anyway. And I went to Taiwan, Taipei, Taiwan, twice. I think I went about 4 months after I was there, and about 8 months into my tour, which broke up my year.
And how long would your R&R last?
I want to say it was minimum 5 days. Could have been 7. I'm not sure. And my second R&R I actually shared with a friend of mine from Torrington. We met in the service, and we became fast friends. We were roommates in basic training, and wound up in Vietnam together, and actually met on R&R, which is pretty cool. We spent 3 days together, and we've been friends ever since.
Isn't that strange? You didn't know him until you both landed in Vietnam together?
Actually, we met in basic training. Yeah, we met in basic training, but
you didn't know him before you
No.
went in, and he was in the next town.
Right.
What was his name?
Terry Colangelo.
What did you do on your however many days of R&R? What kinds of things would you do? That you can talk about.
Yeah, well, actually, sightseeing and eating good food. You know, cold drinks. I can remember having half a dozen shrimp cocktails, some steak, cold beer. I mean, it was just hot showers. Yeah, female companionship. Just hanging out and really enjoying the fact you weren't in Vietnam.
Did you travel anywhere else while you were in the service, while you were over in Vietnam, other than Taipei?
No.
Paul, do you recall any humorous or unusual events that happened while you were overseas?
I'm sure there was some. Actually, I do remember this Robert Torres, actually, the one that went home to get married. We were back in the rear area and we were cleaning our M16s, and you really didn't want to use gas, but some guys did use diesel fuel or gas just to clean them up, but the gas was just too flammable.
Gas
Well,
as in gasoline?
Gasoline, right. And he actually used some gas, and he threw the rest of the gas in a smoldering pile of rubbish, which proceeded to explode. That was pretty humorous. We had told him, don't do it, and he did it, and debris everywhere. It just...
No injuries, though.
No injuries, no. No, there was, I don't remember. I'm sure there was a lot of humorous stuff, but I just...
You'll think of a lot of stuff after we're all done with this.
I'm sure.
What did you think of your fellow soldiers and fellow officers?
Actually, I can't think of if there's one or two guys that were incapable, or that might be it, and I don't even have anyone's name on the tip of my tongue. If I thought of it hard enough, I probably could think of a few guys that I was annoyed by their lack of ability or enthusiasm in the field, but pretty much the guys I served with were all my age or thereabouts, and it was a mixture of white, black, Hispanic, and they all wanted to do the same thing I did, get their year done and go home.
After your year in Vietnam, when you were in your last month, I know you said you were in a short time then, what was that last month like, knowing that you were almost going to go home? Were you more fearful or more excited?
No, definitely more fearful. I mean, you wanted to make sure nothing was going to happen to you at that point. And as luck would have it, 10 days before I was to leave Vietnam, I was sent out to the field with the 90 recoilless, and I did go with 2 team members. I was in charge of it, and one of our line companies had run into a bunker complex, and they wanted these bunkers destroyed, and they needed some heavy firepower. I flew out on a chopper with 2 other team members who had ammunition with them, 90 recoilless ammunition. I blew up the bunkers and then flew back to the fire support base. I told the CO out there in the line company that the commanding officer that I only had 10 days to go, and I wanted to get out of the field as quick as possible. He had no problem with that. I left the other 2 guys there, and I always wondered what happened to them. I thought, because they were fairly new, and I kind of felt like, gee, I don't know what happened. Well, back in I believe in the early 90s, I went to Washington with a group of veterans from my unit that served in the same time period, and the gentleman that organized it was a friend of mine in Vietnam, Tom Denton. He was a newspaper writer at the time for the Dallas Fort Worth Star, and he organized this trip, and one of the guys that he got to know in Vietnam was one of the fellows I dropped off out there in the field, and he also came to our reunion in Washington, and it was like so good to see him. And he looked the same. As I have a picture of him, and he told me about what happened, after that. It was pretty interesting.
Do you recall leaving Vietnam and what your last day over there was like?
I don't recall my last day. I know each time I got on a chopper to get closer to Cam Ranh Bay, it was...
You flew out of Cam Ranh Bay too?
I flew out of Cam Ranh Bay. I just had my fingers crossed, like, but I was excited for sure. And I did meet Dave Teixeira, my old pal from Winsted, and we hooked up in Cam Ranh Bay. Of course, we were leaving. We got to Vietnam the same day, so theoretically we should have left Vietnam on the same day. And it would have been nice if we could have flown home together, but unfortunately Dave wound up spending 2 more days there after I got home. But I flew from Vietnam back to Seattle, and from Seattle I took a commercial flight which got me into Bradley International somewhere around July 24th, 1969, where I was greeted by no one. I didn't let my family know. I wanted to surprise them. But back in those days, it was pretty no ceremonial homecomings. It was, come on, you're home, and that's it.
Now, when you got back to Seattle, Washington, is that where you were discharged?
No, I wasn't. I still had 6 months left on my
Oh, so you
my
were just
2-year.
coming home
I was coming
for a
home for a
leave?
leave. Yes.
So your family didn't know you were coming?
No, they knew I would be home that week, but they
they
didn't know
didn't know
that day.
when?
No.
So no one was at, what, did you have any problems coming across the country at any
No,
of the airports?
I did
you
not.
come in civvies or your uniform?
I was in uniform.
And when you arrived at Bradley, what did you do?
Actually, I had called one of my best friends, and he met me there, picked me up. Of course, it's only a 40-minute ride here from Winsted, and he picked me up over there, and he had written to me faithfully while I was in Vietnam, Peter Fracasso. He also turned out to be the best man in my wedding when I got married a few years later. So he brought me home, and we ran into my sisters on Main Street. They were coming out of ABC Pizza House, and they followed us back to my parents, and it was really good to get home. But down the road, it wasn't even that much long, a few months later, actually Dave Teixeira and I were, we'll say, I don't know, so disillusioned by the being home and there's nothing to do, the excitement is over. We actually even talked about going back to Vietnam. As incredible as that sounds. Had there been somebody there to sign us up that minute, we might have done it. And a lot of guys did. A lot of guys did. They served 2 tours because I don't know if it was the letdown or the psychological, emotional. I'm sure it had something to do with that, but I know it did go through our minds.
So when you came home, you had some leave, and then where, you said you still had 6 months in the service. Where did you go for your last 6 months?
I actually went back to Fort Lewis, and I served as a barrack sergeant. I was in charge of an entire floor of guys that were in the service for anywhere from 6 months to a year or 2, and they were doing clerical type duty. Some of whom were going to go to Vietnam, some of whom were going to be discharged from the service before ever leaving the States. But that was my job for about 6 months, 5 months, because I had 1 month to leave. So I was out there for about 5 months, but my father's sister was out there. And actually I wasn't in Seattle. We were in Fort Lewis, which was about 50 miles from Seattle. But I would go out there on the weekends to my aunt's house, and that was a very nice experience for me. I got to get very close to her family, and they'd give me a nice meal every weekend, and make, I was part of the family. I spent Christmas of 1969, 70 at their home.
And you were discharged from Fort Lewis?
Fort Lewis, right. I left there in February of 1970 and flew home. And
What did you do in the days and weeks immediately following your discharge when you got home?
I was without, I came home and within a week I was working.
Where did you get a job?
I took no time off. Well, I went back to, I was going to go back to my old job, which I had prior to going in the service, but they didn't have the same position available for me. It wasn't a factory, a ball bearing factory. It certainly wasn't a job that I was crazy about, but I kind of was used to it. And another ball bearing factory in town, Winston Precision Ball, had that same job opening, so I actually went to work there. But 6 months of, or a few months of working the midnight shift there was all I could tolerate.
So what did you do then?
Actually, I thought about being a police officer, and of course the military thing fit right into that. And I went down and interviewed with the chief, who was actually looking for, some patrolmen. I took the test that day and was hired.
So you interviewed for a police job?
I did. I took the test, passed it, and the then chief of police, Irving Milano, knew my family, and he said I'd have to get a haircut, which by that time, in the 1970, hairstyles were long. I didn't have long hair, but for police work it was long. So I got a haircut, and I was hired in November of 1970. So just, 8 months or so.
Now, do you feel that your military training prepared you for the police work?
Definitely, yeah. It was, it was a good thing to do after the Vietnam. I mean, it was. I liked the service, actually. I enjoy a lot of things about it. The orders, the neatness, working with guys who wanted to do a certain job and could do it.
And you have those same things in the police department?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't about carrying a gun. I mean, that really wasn't it at all. Just.
Did you go back to school on the GI Bill at all?
I actually did, and I thought that that was a great opportunity. I did take advantage of it, and it was several years of schooling part-time, but I was able to obtain my associate degree in criminal justice. But I do remember one of our professors at the college here in Winston being annoyed that Vietnam veterans were abusing the system and getting, paid, so to speak, to go to college, and skipping classes, or not, not being the wonderful student that he thought we should be. Never mind the fact that these guys, girls, mostly, well, no girls, but guys, had earned the right to get these courses. He thought it was his job to, and I remember him yelling at me for skipping the class and telling me that the next time I skipped his class, I would be booted out of it, and he would make sure that the administrator for the the Vietnam Veteran Benefit Program knew that I lost that class, and consequently that money that went with it. Just kind of left a little bad taste in my mouth. But on the whole, it was a great program, and he certainly wasn't part of it. He was just one instructor who had a attitude towards Vietnam veterans.
Paul, did you suffer from PTSD after Vietnam?
I'd like to say no, and I in retrospect, I think all of us that came home, certainly the guys that I know that served in combat, suffered some type of emotional stress, anxiety when we came home. But I can remember not wanting to even, and I say not wanting to, feeling like no one wanted to hear about it. And it might have been a two-way thing. I mean, we didn't want to talk about it. Nobody wanted to listen, or they were afraid of what we were going to say. And it wasn't because everybody was over there killing babies, and it was just a very surreal situation when we came home. And kind of like got put on the back burner, and I just moved on with police work, and within actually it was about 2.5 years later I was married.
So you got married, and I know you have children. How many children do you have?
Actually, we had 6 children. When I met my wife, she already had 3. And the year after we were married, we had number 4. 2 years after that, number 5, and 4 years after that, number 6.
Paul, did you join any veterans organizations?
I didn't. I didn't join anything. Again, because of our situation when we came home. And I don't think anyone asked me to join any organizations. And maybe 12 years ago, I had stopped at the local VFW on more than one occasion just to have a beer, and some of the members there, encouraged me to join. And they said, not for anything else, but just to be a member, and which helps the veteran causes down the road, to have a voice in veteran benefits and things like that. I bought into it, and I became a life member of the VFW, and I've encouraged other...
What post number is that? It's right here in Winston?
Yes, I'm a member of the VFW Post 296.
Are you involved in any of their activities?
I am actually. I'm a trustee there and have been for about 10 years. And just yesterday, actually, we had a nice clam bake there.
Paul, did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
I'm sure. I joined the service because we, again, Joe, Dave, and myself, we were brought up here in Winston. Our families were all military families. Parents had been in the service, and we joined the service because we thought it was the right thing to do. We were serving our country and fighting communist aggression. In retrospect, why the Vietnam War started, and I don't even care, or does it matter to me. We understood what we were doing. We believed in that. To this day, we have not changed our mind about that. I'm happy I served. I feel horrible for the families of the 58,000 plus soldiers. But again, that was what we were doing at the time. It was the right thing to do. The guys that fled to Canada at 19, I just have to say I'm sorry. At 19, you don't know from your anything. At 19, how you can be that politically astute is beyond me. I know I wasn't. So I don't buy into that philosophy of they didn't want to fight or they didn't believe in war. They were scared. And the propaganda going around the country at the time, the colleges were so liberal, it was pathetic. We had guys dying in Vietnam so that they could run around with headbands and, screaming anti-government protest songs, burning the American flag, which to me was just beyond. I hope these people have been able to live with themselves. But I had no use for that type of activity, and to this day, I don't think our country should go looking for trouble, but I think we need to maintain a strong military presence to protect my children and my grandchildren.
Have you attended any reunions?
I did. I actually went to Washington in the 90s with about a dozen guys that were in Vietnam at the same time as me and also served in the same unit I did. Only two of whom that I personally know. Again, Tom Denton and Dale Usher. And they were actually close friends of mine while I was there. It was nice to see them. We went to the Vietnam Memorial, and we also went to the in the Smithsonian has a floor set aside with the things, the memorabilia that was dropped off by families for the at the wall. That's quite an incredible building to see.
Do you stay in touch with any of your military buddies?
Well,
I know you're still in touch with the two that you joined with, correct?
right, I am. We're as close friends. We've been at each other's weddings, and there's been some tragedies in our families, and we've stood by each other and during those times. And but we've maintained a close relationship, and I see both Joe and Dave on a routine basis. I saw Dave yesterday. Yeah, it's a very unique experience that we had and are still enjoying today.
Paul, how would you say that your military service affected your life?
Well, it was a good thing. And I say that coming home as a whole person. But I can say that Joe Gadenzi, who was seriously wounded, also feels the same way. So I'd like to think that, you know, those of us who went over of sound mind came home in a similar fashion. There's no doubt some of the guys, you know, for one reason or another, the post-traumatic stress or their own situation, weren't able to cope with things over there. But it was a good experience for me. It got me to grow up, certainly, you know, from the naive kid I was at 19. I certainly came home with some, you know, sobering and life-changing experiences, and you know, a lot of those things stayed with me, and they will forever. The names of the guys, you know, I served with, like, it was a small enough group. I mean, I can remember all of them. And the guys who I served with that didn't come home, I can remember them also.
Paul, is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't discussed, or any other memorable experiences that you recall that we haven't talked about?
No, I don't think so. I think
You'll remember it.
I'll remember it, yeah, in the next 4 years.
Paul, I'd like to thank you for your service and for your interview.
Thank you.